So we have reviewed the basic information in the introduction to BSW field experiences, as well as the responsibilities, the safety, and supervision, and reviewed what to do if you have problem students. So we're going to finish with that scary topic, and we're going to move on to assignments and Taskstream. So this is where students tend to have the most anxiety about getting their assignments turned in and ensuring that they are using Taskstream correctly, and that you as the task supervisor or field instructor are also using Taskstream correctly. So we're going to go into that, and hopefully we've given you enough tools as well. You have tips for Taskstream in your packet. You have a guide in Taskstream. Please, in your packet, please get those out so that you can refer to those as we're going through. And whenever you're accessing Taskstream, be sure that you have your guide in front of you. Taskstream is not something that you can just start clicking around in and seeing what happens, because that will throw off the entire sequencing of what needs to happen. So there are specific sequences that need to occur in order for the document to be passed back and forth and graded by the correct people, or just reviewed by the correct people. So please be sure that you have that guide in front of you when you're accessing Taskstream. You should have already received an email if you are a new field instructor that gives you your access or your logon information. If you're a field instructor who has used Taskstream with us before, with our school before, then you already have a logon password. If you have forgotten it, you may call or email Taskstream. Those emails and phone numbers are on your Taskstream guide and your information. So please feel free to contact them directly, and they will help you with that. So let's get into the first assignment, which is the learning plan information. So Taskstream is something that we've been using for a few years now. However, it's been streamlined every semester that we've used it. I think we have gotten it as streamlined as it's going to get, and as user-friendly as it's going to be. Although we continue to take feedback all the time, we've had less and less feedback as we've streamlined it. So hopefully we're getting it to a point that it's a bit user-friendly. After you've used it for a semester, I get better feedback from everyone that they've kind of gotten into the swing of things and have been able to use it a little bit easier. It is our field education document management system. All of our assignments and information in midterms and finals are documented in Taskstream, and then we're able to print out our outcome reports out of Taskstream as well. We also manage our field education evaluations, as the students through the Taskstream system will complete their evaluations of the faculty liaison, the field instructor, and the field agency. And so we're able to, again, print out reports based on that information that students are inputting. As we said before, we continue to always take feedback. We recommend changes to Taskstream within their software that's available, and we try to make changes within our specific DRF programs that we create. There are 4 primary tasks and assignments in Taskstream. I referred to the first one, which is your learning plan and the orientation checklist. Then the student also has 5 journals, and then a midterm and a final evaluation. The student will receive specific emails from Taskstream with links to their evaluations for the field experience. So we're going to dive into the learning plan. The learning plan is typically completed and submitted within the first 2 to 3 weeks. We want to make sure that the student and the field instructor, task supervisor together have a firm, agreed upon plan of learning for the semester. If the student comes back to me in prior to midterm and says, I'm not getting the experience that I wanted, then I'm going to say, let's go back to that learning plan that you agreed upon, and what part of the learning plan is not being fulfilled in your mind. And so that's the document that we use, which you can use for the same purpose, and you can also use to make sure that you are fulfilling what you've agreed to for the student. And so we try to make sure that there is a good, firm learning plan early on. That process takes a while. We'll send it back to the student sometimes a couple of times to make sure that that is very firm. And we review it pretty thoroughly so that we can, again, make sure we have a firm base upon which to build the practicum semester. So that learning plan is due in Taskstream prior to that initial visit that the faculty liaison will make to your agency. The student has to have this learning plan in order to pass field. You can't pass field if you don't have goals set up and to fulfill during the semester. The learning plan needs to be discussed between you and the student, because you're going to bring information to the table that the student doesn't have, and the student is going to bring his or her preferences to the table that you guys can negotiate together and figure out what the agency can fulfill and what they may not be able to fulfill for the student. And you can inform the student on opportunities that exist at your agency that he or she may not be aware of. Be creative with the learning plan. Let the student go to other agencies and visit. Have the student gather information from other agencies. Have the student develop a new resource book or a new student policy manual for you. Be creative. As long as it's facilitating learning related to those learning goals and practice behaviors, it's acceptable. Your faculty liaison is going to review everything just to double check that. So being very active in this process and allowing the student to be active in that process is important. And as I said before, this learning plan should be revisited during those supervision meetings, which are taking place weekly. In the learning plan, there are 3 things that the student needs to do. You have a sample learning plan in the packet of information that was given to you. So please consult that as we're going through this learning plan so you can see some different examples of that. So the learning goals are provided based on CSWE competencies, not advanced competencies. This slide is wrong. It's foundational competencies. This is a foundational BSW practicum. So this is based on the CSWE foundational competencies. We are required to use the competencies that are written by CSWE. We have had focus groups to try to use more acceptable and understandable language on some of those, which has been approved by CSWE. But we do have to use the same ones that they require. This is part of our accreditation. So those are written for us. Just as a little update for those of you that are listening to this, our 2015 new e-pass, our CSWE accreditation requirements have been written, and they have rewritten some of those foundational competencies. So those will be coming out to you. You will begin seeing those if you supervise an MSW student in spring of 2017 and in fall of 2017. So just being aware of that and knowing that there's some change in these competencies coming down that you will soon see. So those competencies are included and are written for the student. What the student will write then are behavioral objectives and specific learning experiences that will happen at your agency. So every agency is different in how they achieve those competencies and practice behaviors written. There are 10 learning goals, and the bullet points underneath each of these learning goals we refer to as practice behaviors. It operationally defines those learning goals. And we'll review those learning goals soon. So the student will write specific observable and measurable behaviors that he or she will do during the practicum to satisfy those learning goals in the first step there. Okay? Then the final thing the student will do is document how that will be monitored and evaluated. How will you, as the field instructor or the task supervisor, be able to tell that the student has met that behavioral objective and thus then met that learning goal? Will you observe the student? Will you read his or her documentation? Will you talk to clients? Will you talk to your coworkers? Will you review the specific project that's been completed? How will you know that the student has done that? Will the student have to give a presentation on certain research that's done or produce that research for you to see? How will you know that this has been taken care of? A great one to know is policy. So if the student is reviewing the policy of the mental health excellence, how will you know that that's been done? You will know that that's been done because the student is producing a written letter to his or her legislator about the mental health excellence. And so it's important for you to help the student understand what you would look at or how you would know that the student has completed that behavioral objective or that learning goal. Okay, we're going to just give you a quick overview of the competencies. In the following slides, we break them down more specifically. So here you have the learning goals or the competencies. We use that word interchangeably. They are our program competencies, but for field, those become the learning goals. So that you see here that we have 9 of them now. If you were a field instructor before, we had 10 of them. Those have been rewritten by the Council for Social Work Education and presented here. So you begin with ethical and professionalism. You have diversity, the human rights and social and economic and environmental justice. Environmental has been added. 4 is research. 5 is policy. And then 6, 7, 8, and 9 are the same, except for you have engage, assess, intervene, and evaluate. And you're looking at those 4 parts across individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. So micro, meso, and macro. How do you engage with a community or factions of the community? How do you assess an organization, etc. So these are the overarching learning goals or competencies, and you'll notice on the next slides there are specific bullet points under each of these which will help to operationally define them and break down these behaviors a bit more. So bear with me on these next 9 slides. It gets to be a little bit boring, but these are exactly what's written on the learning plan. And students are expected to make objectives under each of these specific bullet points or practice behaviors. And so although it does get a little bit tedious, it's important that we know them because this is the objectives that students need to achieve during their time at your agency. And how they achieve these depends on your agency and what's going on there. So if you look at the first one, which is combined ethical and professional behavior, making sure to use the NASW Code of Ethics as well as laws and regulations and models for ethical decision making. So here you would have the student maybe present the ethical decision making model and use that model during one ethical dilemma during the practicum. Also, there are many changes in the NASW Code of Ethics that perhaps your staff is not aware of. They're all related to technology. The new code just came out in January of 2018. And so have the student write up those changes and present to you. Have the student read the Code of Ethics. Lots of things that you can do associated with that first practice behavior. Use reflection and self-regulation to manage personal values and maintain professionalism. So how is the student going to identify when there is some kind of discrepancy or some kind of bias that the student has noticed? Demonstrating professional demeanor and behavior, appearance, oral, written, and electronic communication. So what are your restrictions regarding office information and client information? How is the student expected to introduce? How shall the student appropriately communicate with coworkers and with field instructor, etc. Using technology ethically and appropriately to facilitate practice outcomes. Again, what are the restrictions with technology? Is the student, allowed to document at home? Is the student allowed to communicate is the student allowed to communicate via email with clients? Or are they not? And specifically here, it's important to review your social media policy at your agency. And if you do not have a social media policy, then this would be a good place for you to discuss that and for the student to help you write that. And then using supervision and consultation to guide professional judgment and behavior. You can put the things like student will bring an agenda to weekly supervision, student will review every case, whatever you want to put there to be able to hold the student accountable for supervision and consultation. Competency 2. Forgive me if I'm a little hesitant on these. We're still getting used to these 9 competencies instead of the 10 that I'm used to talking about. So competency 2 is now diversity and difference. So looking at how important diversity is and how that diversity shapes people. So you need to talk about that quite a bit in supervision to be able to meet this practice behavior. That next one is not right. It should be shaping life experiences and practice at the micro, meso, and macro levels. So making sure you're looking at all of those levels with the student. And then the student presenting themselves as learners and looking at the clients and staff and everyone and their constituencies as the experts. So really trying to decrease that power differential a little and understand that the client knows the most about themselves. We certainly don't. And so we need to be taught by the clients and how the students will do that. And then applying self-awareness and self-regulation to look at those personal biases that we may have. And how we apply our value system when we're working with those clients in those constituencies. So what will you build in during supervision to help the student with self-awareness and self-regulation? Will you have them identify one personal bias each day that you have supervision, maybe twice a month, maybe once a month, and develop a plan for how the student will push against those personal biases to remain as non-judgmental as possible with clients. So really finding a way to incorporate these discussions and implement these practices within practicum to meet these practice behaviors. Competency 3, remember, keep looking at that example that you have in your packet or in your email where information was sent to you. Because there are some examples of practice behaviors in there and objectives that the student has written. I don't expect the student to turn in those exact same objectives because every agency is different. Every student's idea of what they want from practicum is different. And each semester your agency is changing and field instructors change, and so objectives are going to be different. But really use this information I'm giving you as well as those examples to brainstorm for each of these to find out how you think the student should meet these. So competency 3 is social and economic and environmental justice. So applying their understanding of each of these to advocate for their clients, both at the individual and the system level. And then engage in practices that advance social, economic, and environmental justice. So I really want to see the students get involved. One thing that there's a big push for right now within social work is increasing voter registration. And so that's one way that they can help their clients have a voice in the world that they live in, is to encourage them to register to be a voter and to become involved politically. There are many environmental agencies. There are volunteer areas that clients can get into in working with environmental justice. And so really encouraging both at the individual level and at the system level, which is within your organization or within the community and the state, to become involved. Have the student get out of the office and get into the community to fulfill these practice behaviors. Competency 4 is research. So students often struggle with this one, especially in their foundational practicums. So there's 3 practice behaviors with this: using practice experience and theory to inform scientific inquiry and research. So the student will hopefully gain some experience with assessment and maybe some basic theories that may, when they're using those with clients, may lead to some scientific questions or maybe even some hypotheses that they want to do some research and check out to see if their hypotheses have been researched before and if they're correct or not. So really trying to combine their experiences to encourage more scientific inquiry. Critical thinking used to be a separate competency completely, but now critical thinking you will see kind of immersed in multiple competencies. And so you see one of the practice behaviors here is about using critical thinking to engage in analysis of quantitative and qualitative research. And so instead of just accepting that, okay, so this research project says this information about this theory, instead of just accepting that because it's written in black and white, really using critical thinking to analyze if this is good research. How was it conducted? When was it conducted? Over what period of time? Who conducted it? What bias existed? Etc. So that you can really look and see if this research is good, or if there were some real big questions about the research. the tool that the student is looking up, maybe research of a tool. Who did that research? Was it the person who developed the tool and has a vested interest? Or was it a completely third party that might have a little more of an objective view? And then use and translate research evidence to inform and improve practice, policy, and service delivery. So hopefully at the agency, you will have some kind of program evaluation information that the student can look at. Most agencies have some kind of QA or QI. So being able to sit on a committee, QA or QI committee within the agency, so that they can watch how that practice happens and how that evidence helps to create initiatives or improvements or change of policy within an agency. So really exposing the student to these opportunities within the agency. Okay, competency 5 is policy practice. So you'll see again, it looks at the local, state, and federal. So we want the student to look at organizational policy as well as community, state, and federal policy. So again, get those students out into some community meetings that may be taking place. Get them into allow them to go to a legislative session or watch a legislative session that live streams on the computer, or go to an advocacy day. The school typically sponsors an advocacy day and takes a bus down there. So allow your student to go there for that day. There are different marches and different activities about Medicaid expansion, about many different things that students can attend. They need to become active. Again, voter registration is one way that they can become active. So really encouraging them to spend that time in the office learning about the organizational policy, but how about outside of the agency as well, and to learn about their state and what initiatives and what policy issues are occurring with healthcare, with mental health, with any kind of policy that is pertinent to your agency. Assessing how social welfare and economic policies impact social services. So doing policy analyses. They have experience in policy 1 and 2 to be able to write a policy analysis. So have them write a policy analysis. Have them complete a fact sheet. Have them write letters to their legislators in support of or against a certain policy that's impacting clients or constituents at your agency. So having them get involved. And again, you see critical thinking here to be able to determine what policies are most helpful to their clients to advance their human rights and their social and economic and environmental justice issues. That can, again, be organizational. You know, are clients getting discharged too quickly? Are they, or are they staying too long and having extra expenses? What kinds of things are happening? What services do clients not have access to because of limited insurance, etc.? So really having them think on that policy level. And again, here's one place where they can write the social media policy in order to protect staff as well as the clients. Okay, so this is really engagement. This is where you'll see some connections between HBSE, human behavior in the social environment, person and environment, systems theory, developmental theory, etc., to help with that engagement process. But remember, the students have also had the groups class and communities and orgs, and should be able to talk about how best to engage organizations and communities. What kind of skills do they need to have? Who do they align with within organizations to get the most done? How can they complete a community assessment if they are not engaging well? And then also the frameworks to engage with clients and constituencies. Some of this will also be their interaction skills class, because you're using the empathy, reflection, and interpersonal skills in order to engage with members of the organization, members of the communities, as well as individual groups and individuals and families. Assessing individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. So collecting and organizing data. That might just be assessment information that they're organizing. That might be an organization needs assessment that they've done to interpret information from clients and constituencies. And using critical thinking to do so. So how do they organize what they've learned in order to properly intervene? So for example, if they do an organization needs assessment and find out that there's no direct money within the organization to buy specific supplies for clients, then they might, after organizing that information, they might decide to do a drive with their sorority to be able to collect those items to be able to use, or start a food pantry for clients if that's what they're identifying that their needs are. So being able to put all of that information together, critically think about it, and then intervene accordingly. And again, in all of these, you're looking at those basic theories: human behavior and social environment, person and environment, systems theory, developmental theory, all of those basic foundation theories, applying those when you're assessing. And then looking at intervention goals. It doesn't have to be some big treatment plan like you would do in a mental health setting, because not all settings do a big treatment plan. However, you are deciding on clients what the goals are going to be. You might meet with a client at Voluntary Action Center and figure out that they need referral to the wardrobe. And so agreeing together with the family that you will give them a taxi pass and a pass to the wardrobe to be able to get what they need. And so that is your intervention goal. That's part of foundational, is intervening for resources, is assessing, finding out what they need, finding out the barriers that exist, and then helping them to achieve those goals and access the resources that are available to them. Looking at the client's strengths, their needs, and their challenges within the clients, within the organization, within a group, to be able to intervene appropriately. And working with the client to choose goals that are important to the clients. And then selecting appropriate intervention strategies based on that assessment, which I've already talked about before. But it's not just the strategies based on the assessment, it's your values and preference of the clients, your experience, and research that talks about best practice. All of that combined with the field instructor experience also to be able to get the best intervention strategies. So how will the student do that at your agency, and what is expected of the student? So now we're getting to the intervention level with, again, across individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. So choosing the correct intervention to achieve the practice goals that the client has set. How will you enhance the capacity for the clients and larger constituencies? Again, you see your basic foundational theories here. And interprofessional collaboration. What committees can the students sit on What projects can the student take responsibility for within that interprofessional collaboration? Sitting on organizational committees as well as community committees. They can attend for you as the field instructor, or they can attend with you. The more you expose them to that, the better they get that larger view of the organization and how it fits into the community as a whole. And then negotiating, mediating, and advocating on behalf of clients, and not just the same clients, but a diverse set of clients. And who will they do that with? Where will they have opportunities to do that? Perhaps at your staffing meetings that you have once a week where you discuss clients. They'll have the opportunity to advocate for a client there. Perhaps when they go to a community meeting, they'll have the opportunity to advocate for your agency to be able to receive more referrals, etc. And then facilitate transitions and endings. This is looking at termination and how the student is managing termination from the beginning that's most effective for your agency and for the constituencies that the agency serves. And finally, we reach competency 9. Thank you for your patience. This is evaluation. So how will the student evaluate some outcomes? How do you know that you have provided a good service to these clients? How do you know what your community needs, or if your agency is serving the clients that they need to serve and are reaching as many people as possible? What program evaluation can the student do? If they are doing a psychoeducational group, can they do a pre-test and a post-test to measure the information that they've shared and if that's been impactful for the client? What can they do, and how can they help process that information that's collected during the evaluation process? Again, using those theories and those frameworks in the evaluation of the outcomes. Again, for some program evaluation and practice effectiveness. So are they doing what the client needs? Are they not doing what the client needs? Is the client satisfied with the level of services that they have been able to receive? So include the student in any kind of evaluation that you do. Again, QA and QI, satisfaction surveys, those types of things, pre-test and post-test, those types of things are very appropriate for the foundational practicum and for students to become involved in. All right, last slide for this part 3 of your recordings. So how to complete the learning plan and the checklist in Taskstream. You're going to review both the learning plan and actually you won't even review the checklist. You're just going to do that in person with the student. So when you're looking at the learning plan in Taskstream, you're always going to do that on the Reviewer tab. There are 2 tabs in Taskstream that we're going to talk about, Reviewer and Evaluator. This is always, the learning plan is always in the Reviewer tab. These, the checklist and the learning plan are due prior to the initial site visit with the faculty liaison. The student completes the learning plan and then requests comments from you. They will specifically choose your name to request comments. You will get an email that says your student has requested comments from you. And you will go onto Taskstream and you will find that. In the tools, it shows you, in your guide, it shows you specific pictures about how to go onto Taskstream and look at the learning plan, and it gives you step-by-step directions for how to do that. A new change this year, this semester for BSWs, is learning plans are going to stay open for additional revisions and changes until after midterm. So the faculty liaison will tell the student, okay, we're far enough into practicum now, I think your learning plan is pretty stable, please go ahead and submit that for grading, at which time the learning plan can no longer be changed. However, because they are requesting comments from you instead of submitting it, it will remain open. So what the student will do is they are going to write their learning plan in Taskstream, and they are going to request comments from you. You are going to recommend any changes that you might have. You will send those comments to the student in Taskstream. The student will then get your comments, make any changes or based on your recommendations, and then they will request comments from their faculty liaison, who will then also make recommendations for the student to make changes in their learning plan. And then they'll simply leave it alone until they want to make a change. For example, maybe you and your student come up with something new that they want to add to their learning plan, or until their faculty liaison gives them permission to formally submit that for grading. That is submitted to the faculty liaison to be graded, not to the field instructor or task supervisor. The checklist will be completed with you and the student together under the student's login. So you and the student will sit down together at a computer screen. The student will log into Taskstream, pull up this form for the checklist, the orientation checklist, and go over each item. There's no initials or anything that's needed. Just once you and the student have discussed that item and collected the information requested, the student will check off that checkbox. And then once finished, we'll just click submit, and that will automatically go to the faculty liaison. Again, please look at your guide and any other information regarding Taskstream that was provided to you in your packet for specific directions step by step.